Good morning, everyone. My name is Dan File. I'm a solutions architect with Megaport, and today we're going to go through kind of some use cases. I'm going to start off with a quick little PowerPoint explaining what Megaport is, and then go into a demo. And what we're going to do is connect North America to APAC so that the AWS and Azure regions can talk across the Megaport backbone between North America and APAC. So this is kind of our global reach. We're in, you can see we're in all theaters. We probably have 900 locations across our network and our global backbone. We are carrier agnostic, so we sit in, DataBank and CoreSite and 123net and Switch and all these different locations and all the different theaters. Um, so
Working our
this is
global
the
backbone.
expanse of our global backbone, and we're in about 26 countries. You can see, like I said, we have a lot of customers on our backbone. This 2,800. This is probably a few months ago. It's growing every day. We do have 100 plus data center operators, and like I said, over 900 data center points of presence across these data center operators. And then, of course, in addition to being the big clouds, we also have over 360 different providers on our network, in our marketplace and directly on our network. So, customers like Rackspace and Alibaba, and we also have like 8x8 and Salesforce and stuff like that. So it's a pretty expansive network. Um, whatever you need to connect to, if we're not connected, then we can work with those partners to get you connected. From a Megaport standpoint of view, there's really three products that are access products. There's ports. We have 1 gig ports, 10 gig ports, 100 gig ports, and those sit in our 900 plus enabled data centers. We also have MCRs, which are Megaport Cloud Routers, and they can be deployed globally. And their main function is to become the hub of the network and route from cloud to cloud, or cloud, kind of like if you want to build your own WAN infrastructure, and bring ports into there instead of having expensive MPLS. And then we have our Megaport Virtual Edge, which is a virtual appliance that you can bring your own software, and that software can be Palo Alto, it can be Cisco SD-WAN, it can be Fortinet, Aruba, Silver Peak, um, various different platforms that you can load your own images on, and then orchestrate those via your FortiManager or your Aruba Orchestrator or vManage, etc. From there, we get into our connectivity services, which are basically just the virtual cross connects. We call them VXCs. They tie from the ports, the MCRs, or the MVEs to anything on the right, which might be service cloud providers, might be our Mega IX, which the IX platform is a direct peering platform between customers and partners. Like I said, it could be a connection to our marketplace. Um, or it could just be a private colo that you have. Let's say you have one of your co-locations facilities in Equinix and the other one in, like, to your point, Nashville. Well, you can use Megaport and have a port in both of those locations and use our backbone similar to a wave, except our backbone's protected to get between those two locations. So really, it's three access products. Connectivity in the middle. You can have 100 VXCs on any port. You can have 25 virtual cross connects on any MCR and 24 virtual cross connects on any MVE going to any of these locations here. This kind of is just a depiction of that, of what I just explained. So you may be in Tier Point data center, and you just need a fiber cross connect over to a Megaport in that data center. And then from there, you can build a virtual cross connect to any of those things that we discussed: cloud service providers, Megaport Internet, data center to data center, etc. Now, if you're not in a Megaport enabled data center, you can have a last mile loop back to your data center brought in by your favorite carrier, and then cross connected in the meet me room over to the Megaport, and then you can get into the Megaport infrastructure. The virtual POP one I talked about was the MVE, where you may have ports in a Megaport enabled data center, or you might have your SD-WAN remote endpoints, and you can tunnel those in via VPN tunnels into the Megaport virtual edge. This again kind of becomes the hub of the network. And from there, you can get it to public cloud service providers. You can get it to anything on our marketplace. You can move it internationally if you need to. So really, the bring your own license model here was what I talked about with Palo, Cisco SD-WAN, Fortinet, things like that, where you load your own image and then point everything towards that hub. Now, cross cloud is similar to the virtual POP, except this isn't a bring your own image. This is kind of a managed Cisco 6-win deployment, where you get to um, do your route choices and do all your building in our portal. I will say that we do have APIs on Terraform available for any of this platform if you choose to do so. But anyway, you can have, let's say, AWS up here and Azure here. And that way, instead of having anything hairpin through the data center, you can move this MCR basically in Washington, D.C., where Ashburn is, where maybe your AWS and Azure lives, or out on the West Coast in San Jose. So that way you have single digit milliseconds between AWS and Azure. And if you need to, you can always tie it back to your data center with a VXC back to the data center. So this is kind of what, if you put all these things together and you're a global company, you can see how all these things interact. I've got ports at data centers. I've got MVEs with SD-WAN tunnels coming into it. I've got MCRs doing routing to other locations in the world or potentially off to cloud service providers. In this instance, we're kind of talking about global WAN. So we're building all these different data centers, remote sites that are on SD-WAN where they're tunneling in different parts of the globe, and then tying these all together across the private Megaport backbone. I did want to talk just a second about Megaport Internet. A few months ago, about 6 months ago, we introduced our Megaport Internet, and you can connect that to a port. You can connect that to an MCR. You can connect it to an MVE. This is kind of the resiliency. We'll have a red router and a blue router sitting in each Megaport enabled facility that has internet. They're tied together in an HA pair. And that way, if one of the ISPs goes down, it has a failover mechanism that anybody that is on this router or tied to this router will fail over to ISP1. Now, for true redundancy, you would have to have ports or MVEs or MCRs off of each the red and blue router. What this is, if you only had one, what we're doing is basically saying if an ISP fails, you still have connectivity. So for true diversity and resiliency, you would want to put a port in what we call our red zone, a port in our blue zone, tie it to each router, and then you would have full redundancy for internet. Um, Lastly, I want to talk about our Mega IX. A lot of people don't know about it, but what it is this is direct peering. So you can jump on our backbone on our IX platform and direct peer with anybody else that sits on that network. So this is a little different than internet because it doesn't go through hop counts and stuff like that. These are actually customers and or different entities that sit directly on our IX exchange, and you would be able to direct peer with like Netflix or Cloudflare or Google or something. So giving you that more quick response time to their platform. Although it's similar to internet based, it's more direct peering than it is on the internet. So with that, I'm going to go into a demo. I don't know if there's any questions out there, but we'll save those to the end. Feel free to put them in the chat and I will get to them if we have time. If not, then I will respond to them after the call via follow-up email. So this is kind of what we're going to deploy today. I've already deployed Azure and AWS and APAC to a Megaport Cloud Router. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to build out an environment with a Megaport Cloud Router, AWS and Azure in North America, and potentially down to a data center, right? Now, why would I do this? Well, if you know Azure and AWS, to use the cloud service provider's backbone to get between theaters or North American APAC, it's very expensive. With Azure, you have to have a global license add-on. There's transport charges in between there. You still can't get between AWS and Google, and you would have the same with AWS. You would be building transit gateways. You would be using their long haul network to get back to the United States. And and it just becomes very expensive to run this when you're doing a cloud to cloud deployment and you're trying to tie your North America regions to any other regions, in this case, APAC. So what we can do is you can use our Megaport Cloud Router that I talked to before. And even if we separated this in between, we have cloud to cloud on a private backbone using AWS Direct Connect and Azure Express Route versus having to connect these two over a VPN tunnel. Now, when I bring in my international play where I need to connect my North American to my APAC loads, instead of bringing that across the cloud service providers' backbones, I can use Megaport backbone and then tie in my data center, right? So let's kind of see what that looks like. So I'm going to go into my Megaport portal, and you can see that it shows all of our locations globally on the front page, right? And spin this around, you can see as I drill, if I want to drill in, it'll show me the 82 locations that sit in EMEA. You can see my 3 services that I've spun up, which happen to be the MCR and then the connections to AWS and to Azure. So I can spin this all around, and you, like I said, you can drill into, where these locations are. If I drill in more, you can see I start expanding. This happens to be in the Fort Worth area, and you can see all the locations that I have available. So when I go into my services tab, this was what I was talking about. I built my MCR in Singapore. I've built the connection to AWS, and I've built the connection to Azure. Now, this is a demo. You would want to build a second connection to Azure off of this MCR because that's what is required to meet their SLAs. That's an Azure requirement, not a Megaport requirement. But for this demo, I just wanted to build one back to AWS and to Azure. So now what I'm going to do is I need to connect something in the United States. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to create an MCR. And I'm going to build that MCR in Chicago. Now, these are our different locations in Chicago where I can build MCRs. You can see I have red zones and blue zones, or you can let Megaport decide which zone you want to be in. I'm going to put this in the red zone, and you can see the different locations that I happen to be in. So let's just build this in, I don't know, core site, Chicago. I have 4 different versions of MCRs. I have a 1 gig, a 2.5, a 5 gig, and a 10 gig. So this is the amount of throughput through the MCR. If you have multi-clouds and pushing a lot of data, you might need a 5 gig or a 10 gig. I'm going to choose 1 gig here for the demo. I'm going to name this, I'm going to say Dan P MCR for North America. The service level reference is just if this was tied to a project or a specific project that you wanted to, that you maybe want to tie it back to a cost center or some kind of budget. This is not a required field. All the required fields are sitting here with the red stars. You can see the different terms we have here. This is no subscription, is month to month. We have 12-month, 24-month, 36 months. I'm building this on a month to month just because this is a demo. This is the Megaport ASN for the MCR. You can replace this with your own ASN if you want to, public or private. I am going to have my BGP default state as enabled, and I don't want any tags. So this is kind of a summary. Tells me I'm building an MCR. I'm building it in Chicago. Here's my ASN. It's 1 gig. Here's my pricing, and I'm going to add this MCR. Now, what it does is it doesn't order anything yet. It just puts it over here in a shopping cart. So I'm going to go ahead and order this. It's going to validate my order, and then I can order. So you have a few steps before it actually gets deployed, right? And you can back out of that at any time. Now this is starting to deploy, and I want to go start building my connections to AWS and Azure. I'm going to click on Azure here, and you can see that the only thing I need is my Azure service key. So with Azure, you start in Azure by getting your ExpressRoute service key. AWS, you start on the Megaport side. I just happen to be in my Azure portal. You can see here's my Singapore, here's my ExpressRoute for North America. I'm going to go ahead and grab this ExpressRoute service key here, and I'm going to drop it into the Megaport portal. Now, we're running some APIs to verify that it's an actual valid key. You chose the peering location and the regions based on the key that you put in Microsoft. And you can see that I have both my primary and my secondary available because these little keys are green. I'm going to build this to Washington, D.C. If I wanted to build the secondary, I would do the same process where I'd come back in, use my ExpressRoute service key again. This guy would be grayed out. This guy would be green. I would choose my secondary and then do next. I'm going to again choose, I'm going to make this a name. I'm going to call it NP Demo ExpressRoute NA. I'm going to choose a no subscription because this is a demo. And then I'm going to go ahead and add this VXC. So again, it didn't order anything. You're putting in my shopping cart. Let's get this thing going. And then I'm going to order it. Okay. So you can see that my MCR is up now. And now we're waiting for running a bunch of APIs with Azure. Putting in the IP addresses, bringing up ASNs, bringing up BGP, etc. This takes a couple of minutes. I'm now going to go in here and build my connection to AWS. This is a different way to get to it. If you'll notice before, I had all the drop downs in here. That's for the first connection. The second connection, you just go into the MCR because, like I said, this is becoming the hub now. You create a connection, you create a cloud connection. I want to go to AWS. In AWS, you have hosted VIF or hosted connections. We have videos on what the differences are. It's really a AWS difference between what you can do with hosted VIF and hosted connection. I'm really not going to go through that. I'm going to go choose hosted VIF here just because it's a little bit easier and I don't have to jump between a bunch of portals. I can go in here, I'll choose the United States as my platform. And here are the different locations in the United States that I can get to. You can see there's quite a lot of them. So I'm going to choose Ashburn, Virginia, US East 1. I'm going to name this NP Demo AWS Direct Connect. I'm going to make this, let's say 100 meg. And then I'm going to choose no subscription because, again, this is a demo. If I want to add tags, I could add tags. This is where I need to put in my AWS account ID. So like I said, with Azure, you start by creating the ExpressRoute service key. In AWS, you start in Megaport portal and just give it your um, account ID. So I already have my account ID in here. I have my customer ASN from when we built the MCR, and then I get to create my Amazon side ASN. Let's try 65001. And then I would need a BGP auth key and my IP addresses, but if you don't fill these in, then the API will go ahead and negotiate those with AWS and fill this in for you. I'm going to click next. I can look at my details here, and then I'm going to add this VXC. Puts it in the shopping cart. Let's go ahead and order this. Order now. Okay. Now you can see the express route that we kicked off a little while ago is now up. We have our MCR up. We're starting to run our deployment with AWS. I will need to go into AWS and go back to my virtual interfaces once it comes in, and then I will have to accept that interface before it will actually start BGP peering. So this does take a minute or two. We're still running APIs, but it'll come in here as a virtual interface. Then I can go in and accept it. Like I said, we're going to also tie this off from NCR to the data center. So let's go ahead and build our Megaport and tie our port into our VX into our MCR. So we have, this is all the North America stuff we have built. Here is the Singapore stuff we had built. We're now going to create a port. Let's filter this by country. And let's say that I was in Chicagoland, and maybe I'm in Cyrus One in Aurora, right? So I can click on next. I can say I want a 1 gig, a 10 gig, or a 100 gig port. 1 gig and 10 gig, 100 gig ports are the same for 1 gig and 10 gig. So I'm just going to choose a 10 gig here. I'm going to call it Dan P Demo Port. I'm going to choose a month-to-month subscription. If I wanted to have diversity, what this would do is create a second port in the blue zone. So, you know, if this is a red zone port, it's going to create a second port in the blue zone, and that way it's diverse from the first port. I could also enable lag, and I could lag up to 8 ports if I wanted to, essentially making this an 80 gig port. We're not going to do any lagging or do any diversity options. I'm just going to add this port. I'm going to go ahead and order it. And this is going to give me the LOA CFA. Now this port's not going to go green because typically when I download my LOA, I'm going to have to go give that to my data center operator. And then the data center operator is going to have to throw a cross connect over my cage. But for this demo, you can see that this port is sitting here, and in a few minutes, I'll get my LOA. Looks like my AWS is up. Let's go back into the AWS portal. Here is my, this is in confirming state. So here's my DXVIF. I need to go in and accept this and send it to a virtual gateway. And then what that's going to do is give me my IP addresses. You can see that my Amazon side is 64513. I believe I used 65001. So we're going to go back in the Megaport portal and change that. You'll see here's my BGP authentication code. Here's the Megaport ASN. So let's go back and change this from 65001 to 64513. It's easy as going into the Megaport Cloud Router into the VXC. which is right here. I'm going to go next. You can see here's my BGP attributes. I click on edit. I'm going to put in here 64513. I'm going to do update. I'm going to do save. That's going to take a few minutes. And then BGP will come up. Now, I will say we have about 5 minutes left. AWS is historically slow with bringing up BGP, but at least hopefully we'll see it in the Megaport portal. Moving on, we're going to build another connection off of here, and we're going to build a private connection to my port. This is my port. I'm going to build that. Say Dan VXC to port. Make that 500 meg. I'm going to leave this as auto assigned VLAN. You could put in your own VLAN if there's a specific VLAN you wanted to use. I would put in my BGP attributes. Let's just skip past that now and get this VXC up. And now you can see that this VXC is now this VXC. I'm going to order it in the portal. And then the last thing I want to do is build another private VXC. I'm going to build that over to my Singapore MCR. Make that 200 meg. Now this here, I can fill in my BGP attributes. Let's do 10.0.0.1/30. I'm gonna go in here and add my BGP attributes. I'm not gonna have any passwords. Enable it. And I would have to go do the same thing on the other router to bring up BGP on that side. Let's go look back into, we also have on these MCRs what's called our looking glass function. So you can go into the looking glass and see if BGP up is the route tables. Now, I have not connected these to any VNets or VPCs, but if I did, all those routes would be populated from my express route and from my direct connect. But you can see it does see my /30s from the different cloud service providers. This one coming from Azure, this one coming from AWS, and also the BGP session to my port, right? So let's go back to my dashboard. If I zoom out, you can now see where my services are with my VXC going all the way around to Singapore. I go into here. Oh, gotta order that. I know we have about 1 minute left. My point is you can see how easy this is for Megaport to create your services within our portal. Again, this is all Terraform enabled also. Um, Obviously, you have to do some router work and stuff like that, but literally in a few hours, you could build a global deployment that I've built here, tying, my MCRs together with my AWS environments internationally, and then again, my AWS environments in North America, heading back to my data center. Um, Feel free if you have any questions to get in touch with us. You can always go to megaport.com. We have all of our docs online there if you want to have any research, or you can reach out to your Megaport account director and talk about your environment, and you'll have an essay like me that you'll work with to build your exact design. Thank you very much for joining and have a great weekend.